here to stay. Waking up, waking.
Hello and welcome to the flagship episode of MPR Unscripted, a video series where we kind of just sit back and relax and just generally have a chilled out talk about whatever pop culture stuff seems interesting at the moment. And with the movie right around the corner, honestly probably already released by the time I get this out, I figure now is as good of a time as any to talk about the big boy blue himself, Superman.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie.
Okay, so originally I had recorded a completely different video. Mostly I was going to talk about my personal experience with the character Superman, how I liked him as a child, usually seeing him in things like the Superman animated series and the Justice League cartoon. And then when I turned into a teenager, I kind of started disliking the character a lot more. And that kind of carried over all the way through college, where I vehemently disliked the character. And so about 2021, during the lockdown, when I had a lot more free time, and I went back and looked into the character myself and discovered a lot of misconceptions that I had about who Superman was and why that led me to end up disliking him as a character. I recorded that video under the impression that everyone else kind of got who Superman was, and that I was the one who was kind of being weird and didn't really understand and didn't take the time to read. But seeing some of the responses to the new Superman movie, I'm kind of realizing that the problem was a lot different from what I was talking about originally. So that's kind of what the pivot to this video is addressing. So first things first, kind of a short non-spoiler review of the movie.
I like it.
Funny enough, I actually have a lot of similar feelings for this movie that I did for the Birds of Prey movie. I think across the board, the performances are pretty great. I know everyone is going to talk about David Cornsweet, and honestly, rightfully so. I don't think this script and specifically this version of Superman work without his performance being as strong and believable as it turned out to be. It is a much younger Superman. Honestly, at times it kind of feels like this is right after his time as the Superboy of Smallville. But I think it works really well as a jumping off point for this character in this new universe, and a lot of that is thanks to the way that David embodies his role. Cornsweet aside, I think everyone genuinely brings their A game to these roles, with Rachel Brosnahan and Nicholas Hoult in particular really putting in standout performances, but that really shouldn't be much of a surprise to anyone already familiar with their bodies of work. But I will say, and honestly this is where the movie reminds me a lot of Birds of Prey, that this movie did kind of feel a bit overcrowded. Like there were two distinct groups of people to follow, and neither really got the amount of screen time that they probably should have. I think a lot more time with the people around Clark would have been great. Jimmy Olsen especially, since he's supposed to be Clark's best friend, and that feeling gets a little bit lost. But also Perry White, who ends up feeling like he's there just to check off a checklist of iconic characters or something. Likewise, the Justice Society feels interesting. Their characters written and directed towards one of James Gunn's strengths, that being making teams of flawed but ultimately good aligned characters. But they do kind of feel like a separate thing that really could have been its own movie, which honestly I actually would really want to watch. Like, these characters are great, don't get me wrong. Guy Gardner is Guy Gardner. He is the asshole of the Lantern Corps, but undeniably good at his job. Mr. Terrific is surprisingly terrific. I mean, you know, he's not like instantly braiding his hair anytime there's a mention of danger, so how terrific can he really be, you know? And Hawkgirl is,
I'm not like Superman.
she's there too, I guess. But as much as I like these characters, it does kind of feel like at least some of their screen time should have gone to the core people around Clark Kent more so than the core people around Superman. But that said, I also understand the importance of having them there so that you can show that Superman inspires everyone, even more established heroes. And also on a more meta level, it does kind of seemingly address the current state, or maybe after this movie, the previous state, of modern day superhero content, and how this character in this universe is leading the way and moving in a better direction. So yeah, I'd say the movie's probably like an 8 out of 10, if you don't mind it being a little bit overstuffed. Maybe like a solid 7 to 7.5, if that kind of thing does bother you. And to be fair, it does look like the general public does mostly agree with me on that assessment. Unfortunately, as with everything online these days, there are some people who disagree.
James Gunn Superman is the worst fucking movie that's ever been made. I stay true to what I said. While it's closed, I'm not giving money to James Gunn, the freak, or DC.
I don't think it's any real surprise that there are people who don't really seem to get this character or this movie and why it works the way it does. Media literacy and reading comprehension are both at an all-time low these days, after all. But I still think it's interesting to look at why that is and how we kind of got to this point. So, as a former Superman hater, like legitimately could not stand this character, I want to open up the dialogue to anyone interested in engaging with it. Why do you think this movie is getting the reception that it is, whether that be positive or negative? It's not like the character Superman is unknown or that this version of him is a surprise twist. If anything, this is one of the most comic accurate portrayals of the Man of Steel since Christopher Reeves. So why are detractors suddenly so put off by him? Personally, I think there's an easy answer and a harder answer. Easy answer, let's be real, it's the Snyderverse. The harder answer, let's go over the easy answer first. Back in 2013, two technically different but ultimately pretty similar versions of Superman became popular in the mainstream cultural zeitgeist, that being the Injustice comics and the video game that came out later that year, as well as the Zack Snyder directed Man of Steel. These versions came out only a couple months apart and really pushed the needle when it came to how we as fans of comic media looked at and discussed the idea of a Superman. Man of Steel, well, I mean, what hasn't been said about Man of Steel at this point? I think Hat Guy from that one podcast puts it pretty well.
Man of Steel is his least favorite movie of all time.
I think it's the worst. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hate it so much.
It's a bad Superman movie.
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
great superhero movie.
I definitely don't agree with that statement.
Really?
Yeah, he hates it through and through.
It's so bad. If I want a realistic take on a Superman character, Superman is an alien that flies around and shoots lasers out of his eyes. In many iterations, has frost breath. That guy, we're gonna make a realistic take on that. You, Zack Snyder. I'm out of here with that. I hate that. I hate it so much. Man of Steel sucks balls, man.
Now, I don't know if I say it's a bad movie overall, but I definitely think it's a bad superhero movie, period. And I can't see it as anything but that, so it's hard for me to be any more objective on this topic. I think as a film, it does ultimately accomplish what it sets out to do, but I think that its goal is built on a faulty premise. Man of Steel is a movie about a benevolent deity who struggles and tries his best to live among beings he's been taught are lesser than him and he can't fully understand, but he does want to love. If you watch it through that lens and completely ignore the story it's actually supposed to be telling, the story that the studio paid money to be able to tell and marketed heavily to the general public that it would be telling, then I guess the movie kind of works. Surprisingly, it even makes like half of Batman v Superman work as well, because of course the reaction to this strange creature would be distrust and later violence. Just ask Dr. Malcolm how far mankind is willing to go, even just for something as simple as opening an amusement park.
God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs.
But the actual point of that Nietzsche quote that he's borrowing from is the same problem as making a movie about a distant god and calling it Superman. Because the idea of a god is much more alien or distant than the idea of another person, it's very easy for humans to project their personal or even collective ideas and beliefs onto something more conceptual like a god than it would be for them to do so to another person who can clearly state what they believe in individually. It's the same phenom behind people who claim to like animals more than other people because they think that the evils that animals do are more primal and intrinsic, and the evils that humans do are more calculated or intentional, completely ignoring all the horrible shit that animals do purely because it lights up the pleasure centers in their brain, as well as animals' ability to plan and wait and use deception to get what they want, while at the same time ignoring all of the good that humans do for each other on a regular basis, intentionally plot out and plan to do on a regular basis, solely because a person was bad to them at some point and a pet was nice to them at some point. Basically, it's much easier to project your own sense of right and wrong, or good and bad if that makes more sense, onto something that can't speak and complicate those feelings for you. What I'm saying is that regardless of mythology or belief, mankind will always reshape the idea of a god to better fit our personal image. Jump cut to today with this new Superman movie, and now people are having to interact with a character that knows who he is, what he wants, and is able to both verbalize and act on that in a way that is true to them, as opposed to the Snyder version of the same character who had no idea who he was, no idea what he wanted, and kind of just floated around aura farming in the middle of a disaster. And since the blank slate character is replaced with one that has a clear defined personality, a lot of people who are projecting what they wanted to see in the character onto the Man of Steel Superman are now having a culture shock seeing Gunn's version, which is honestly kind of funny because not that long ago I heard people complaining about how Gunn was somehow dumbing down Superman by having him outright say the things that matter to him. But honestly, it is kind of needed to combat what the writing for Man of Steel fucked up about this character. If this movie has to meticulously spell things out for the audience to be able to understand its main character, it's at least partially due to some of the audience not letting go of the fundamentally flawed previous adaptation of said character. It's like if Twilight was somehow suddenly rewritten by Charlotte Bronte. A lot of people who thought that they liked Bella before would come to be faced with the reality that they just liked having an empty stand-in to represent themselves. Man of Steel tried to take a more grounded, more gritty or realistic approach to the idea of an alien who gets superpowers from the sun, because I guess the Nolan Batman films made a metric fuck ton of money, but ultimately this just made the most boring version of the character in my opinion. He doesn't wear bright colors, his underwear isn't on the outside, he doesn't try to lead villains away from the city to minimize collateral damage, he doesn't take the time to save anyone that doesn't have a speaking role. There's no real moment of Superman saving the cat, a fundamental film lesson based on this character that every writer, director, producer, actor, anyone involved in making a story come to life has probably heard ad nauseum at this point. And the problem is that that's not Superman, like, at all. But it is the Superman that mainstream audiences were given and have gotten used to. And as the world has seemingly grown darker, so too has our media. And as a result, so too has our idea of a Superman. Which isn't entirely Man of Steel's fault, but for a large portion of mainstream audiences, that perception is pretty easily traced back to this movie and its particular version of Clark Kent. And I mean, poor Henry Cavill, man. I remember reading that the version of Superman that he wanted to play was a lot closer to Gunn's version than what he was given. And dude's actually a good actor too, so I 112% believe he would have pulled off a believable performance if just given the right script to support it. Honestly, if I had a nickel for every time he was the lead of a project adapting a previously well-established IP, one filled with a talented cast who really do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to making the project likable in the first place, only to be completely hamstringed by production caring way more about doing their own thing over understanding the characters and story of the source material and why audiences liked those things, I'd have 3 nickels, which isn't a lot, but is one more than the quote usually points out, so I guess there's that at least. Then at the same time, you have Injustice, which, while at the time was an interesting what-if story, only actually works as a deconstruction of what makes the character of Superman great to begin with. This storyline, I think, also single-handedly set Wonder Woman back in a way that I really don't think she's ever recovered from, but she deserves her own video on that another day.
You're Miss Independent, or at least you try, but your first story is you running off with a guy.
Injustice paints Superman as something of a benevolent dictator, someone doing terrible things and taking away the common person's freedom and autonomy in favor of his protection, something that he sees as a necessary evil in order to actually be good. And with the exception of that one time that they did a crossover with the Masters of the Universe and He-Man showed up to save the day for a little bit, this is a very dark and bleak storyline, one with almost no hope to be seen, and in order for that to be the case, you have to write Superman differently. He can't be who he is naturally because who Clark Kent is naturally inspires hope in others. Not because of the powers he has that makes him super, but because of the man he is that makes him super even without the powers.
Only one creature could create so much destruction. The hideous, people-eating, killing machine, Atomo! Atomo!
No, Atomo. I, Superman.
Okay, Superman. Oh no. It's a missile. When it comes down, everyone will die. There it is! Giant?
Oh, God. You stay. I go. No following.
You are who you choose to be.
Superman.
Anyway, that's the easy answer. The harder answer is that in the wake of 9/11, domestic culture, and as a result, domestic media, changed basically overnight. This was essentially the first real time America had been chin checked to that level, and understandably, the people were scared and looking for comfort. Actually, you know what? Alton Brown talks about this in his Hot Ones episode, how that fear-driven search for comfort basically created this huge boom for the Food Network in America. And it's really interesting to listen to someone who directly experienced this phenomenon talk about it from a production standpoint.
That's a really interesting question. I have to say 9/11, because the entire country wanted comfort, and they turned to food. Food was all of a sudden the only thing that people really wanted to watch. And I remember what happened to the ratings at Food Network. It was unreal. If anybody ever had any doubts about food's ability to bring people together, completely dispelled by that one incredibly tragic event.
But that same principle is applied to, well, I mean, kind of everything. But in this case, very specifically, it's applied to Superman. No longer was there as much of a focus on his extraterrestrial origins, the resulting fallout of those origins, how those origins impact the character, and how that origin was created by two different sons of Jewish immigrants, both of whose parents came to America to be safe from, I'm pretty sure, Russia in some capacity, and how that personal real-life immigrant refugee experience inspired the creation of Superman. Instead, there was much more of an emphasis on Clark Kent's small-town American roots, the fact that he was just like us, a good old all-American hero who beats the bad guys by upholding traditional American values. Basically, they turned our boy into Captain America. And not even the interesting version of Cap, but the lame singing and dancing poster boy version. This was combined with the message from the American government of, sometimes, in order to keep you all safe, we have to get our hands dirty. Basically, their explanation of why the attack happened in the first place, but also their justification for what they were about to do in response. And while it took some time to truly affect the big boy blue, you can see the timeline much more clearly with other heroes surrounding him. Like Batman going full deep state Big Brother and illegally monitoring all the citizens of Gotham, because in his mind, it was justified in order to keep them safe. But it was only a matter of time before this effect caught up to Mr. Truth, Justice, and the American Way himself. So I actually theorize that this also directly contributes to a rise in popularity of Alan Moore's stories, V for Vendetta and Watchmen in particular, as the general public kind of became more and more aware of the government's power and began to slowly develop a healthy distrust, but again, that's a video for another day. Watchmen in particular, though, relates to this topic specifically because you can see this current Superman's timeline on a smaller scale. With both Superman and Watchmen, their story has an incredibly nuanced take on checks and balances and not letting rampant power go unchecked or unnoticed or unchallenged. Both of their stories get popular enough to get a movie adaptation. The movie straight up does not get the source material and makes like generic action slop that gives general audiences the wrong idea about these characters. Then years later, a much more faithful and well-informed adaptation is released, but because the general public is only used to the bad adaptation and not the original story, they call the new adaptation either boring or woke or honestly whatever other buzzwords that Fox News can come up with at the time. Wait. Oh shit, wait a minute. Hang on. Fuck it, we'll do it live. 1 second. Watchmen. Yeah, I was right. Okay, so both bad adaptations that kind of fuck up the public perception of these characters and stories were directed by Zack Snyder. Bro, who keeps letting him do superhero stuff? Like, this guy clearly does not understand them. Just like he didn't understand that the Spartans were actually lame as hell, and currently doesn't understand what made Star Wars what it is. Don't get me wrong, no disrespect or ill will towards the guy. I'm not the biggest fan of his style of movie making in general, but I do respect him as an artist and like his approach to the craft. Anyway, that's off topic. What I was trying to say is that because the domestic comic book buying population was afraid and seeking comfort, the character changed to match that fear at a time when what we really needed was for him to stay the same inspirational version of himself, and to have that inspiration be what carries us out of a state of fear. Fast forward to now, where that fear has created an ingrained terror response of, if you have the power to save me in theory, and are for one reason or another unable to in practice, you're selfish and bad, and shouldn't be allowed even a single moment of not being on the clock, where you get to spend time with friends, family, or loved ones. Basically, just completely disregarding the Clark Kent part of his identity altogether in favor of a 24/7 Superman who saves people nonstop. Ignoring the fact that he is physically unable to do that, physically unable to be everywhere at once and save everyone all the time, and him accepting that he can't do that so that he can actually help the ones that he is able to reach, being a very important character arc for him in the comics, a 24/7 Superman would stop caring about humanity. Not right away, maybe not even for a long time, but eventually he just wouldn't care anymore. The reason he saves people in the first place is because who he is as Clark Kent. The good-hearted farm boy who was raised by the two best parents in comics, who wants to see everyone safe and happy, that just so happened to get the power he needed to try and make that desire a reality for as many people as he can.
Dreams save us. Dreams lift us up and transform us into something better. And on my soul, I swear that until my dream of a world where dignity, honor, and justice are the reality we all share, I'll never stop fighting. Ever.
If he stops being Clark Kent, he stops dreaming about a safe world for all, and we're right back to the 2013 versions of the character. He spends time as Clark Kent, goes to work as a reporter because it surrounds him with people who inspire him to continue to be better, and in return, he can inspire the rest of us to be better. And not just in the cape either, it's very important to the character that he inspires us as a reporter as well. He makes sure to deliver truthful, honest coverage of breaking news on complicated and very dangerous situations. Ones that either aren't getting reported on, are trying to be covered up, or are being reported on with a clear bias by other outlets. He isn't sitting around coming up with like fucking BuzzFeed quizzes or something. He's finding more people to save, and in the process telling you about those people in hopes that you too stand with him in your own way against injustice. Clark being Superman 24/7 absolves humanity of any responsibility to be better. It strips them of their ability for accountability, because Superman will just come and save the day no matter what I do.
Piece of shit alien! That is where you've always been wrong about me, Lex. I'm as human as anyone. I love, I get scared, I wake up every morning and despite not knowing what to do, I put one foot in front of the other and I try to make the best choices I can. I screw up all the time, but that is being human. And that's my greatest strength. And someday, I hope, for the sake of the world, you understand that it's yours too.
That's Superman. He's a force of good for all. A force so powerful, it's like looking directly at a star. You shouldn't be able to see anything else but the light shining off of him and be inspired to be among the stars yourself in the same way that he is, by doing good like he does. The people crying that this Superman isn't the same as before, or that he was somehow ruined by people with agendas, either didn't understand the character before, were only ever really familiar with adaptations of the character who didn't understand who that character was supposed to be in the first place, or are being blinded by the light coming off of Superman and are failing to reconcile that with the darkness inside them. The people complaining that he somehow isn't representing the American way part of his motto are failing to recognize, or honestly just flat out ignoring, the fact that America today and America when that motto were coined are two very different places. Honestly, the America of Superman's time would see the America of today as a hostile foreign nation, not a reflection of itself. Either way, if you're finding yourself agreeing with takes like the ones from Fox News or Idiotic, go outside, touch some grass, take a shower, interact with some real people. I promise you, the you in 5 years will thank you for what you did today. And if after all of that, you still don't necessarily like the Superman movie because it just doesn't appeal to you or just doesn't feel like a good movie, that's fine. You can have criticisms of things as long as it's actual criticisms of things. Maybe you didn't like the pacing. Maybe you didn't like jokes coming at the expense of more heartfelt or emotional moments. Maybe you don't like the look of some of the CGI. Maybe you wish that things were more streamlined and focused and a lot less bloated. All of these are valid criticisms and reasons to dislike the movie. But if you don't like the movie of Superman because you think that Superman wouldn't act in the way he's acting in the movie, you're wrong. If you don't like the movie because you think that Superman is woke now and that people are trying to ruin his character, you're wrong. You just did not know who the character was before. This Superman is very similar to many other versions that have come before him. Almost all of the versions that have come before him, with the exception of, again, not to shit too much on the Zack Snyder, but the Snyderverse. So yeah, like the movie, don't like the movie. As long as you have legitimate reasons, cool. Absolutely have your genuine, valid experience and opinion. But if you dislike the movie because you're like, oh, things shouldn't have agendas, things shouldn't have messages.
That's the whole point, isn't it?
Art inherently has meaning to it. And if you're just now realizing that art has meaning to it and that every piece of art before it has had meaning to it, you need to either reflect on, were you just so unaware of the world around you? Or did all the art you consumed before just have messaging that aligned with what you already agreed with, so you just didn't pay attention to it? And if that's the case, what is it about this specific messaging, about trying to be better to one another, trying to do better by one another, upsets you so? Anyway, I've been talking way too much for way too long, so I'm gonna go ahead and head out. I'm Atufu, brothers. Until we meet again.